Songs of Silence is a new 4X fantasy strategy game, a unique blend of these real-time battles with kingdom management, hero development, and all of it inside of this wonderfully unique and aesthetic world. I first checked out Songs of Silence back in the Steam Next Fest, its demo in October of 2023, and they are back in this sponsored video because they're launching a Kickstarter campaign in mid-March, and there's always wonderful things to check out over on the Steam listing for Songs of Silence as well. So, let me give you an overview with a link below where you can check it all out for yourself. Songs of Silence begins in this very early state by offering up a few different options. Of course, campaign as well as skirmish and asynchronous multiplayer. Let's start with the campaign, because the storytelling and the atmosphere around this game, not just for the overall narrative, but also when you're down in the trenches, in the battles, or building your kingdom, is really important. I won't spoil it, but the sort of underlying theme is you're a queen, fleeing with some refugees, trying to find a new home, and trying to escape the ever-encroaching silence, this darkness and evil that's spreading across the land. And with that story playing out, the game throws you straight into the fight, the campaign acting as a little bit of a tutorial alongside this, the actual in-game tutorial. And I have to say, for what is obviously very much an early work-in-progress build for this game, the tutorial is brilliant, and actually kind of resembles the rest of what Songs of Silence is all about. It's about these games that can be played in an evening, or even quicker still, yet not compromising on the world building, the atmosphere, and its very unique style. And I think you'll see that a bit more as we tease out some of its early features. The world itself, as I said when I first tried it in the demo, and as I'll say again now, is stunning. The way that you move around it, and the way it tells its quick stories, these quick narrative events interlocking themselves in between the actual fights, and your progression as a hero leading an army, and in this case your refugees, across the world fleeing the silence, which ironically sounds brilliant too. The actual fights themselves, as well as some of the broader elements of the world that we'll talk about a little bit later in the video, are interfaced with this nice card building element too, where as your heroes level up and progress, you'll unlock more in-game battle abilities, or maybe kingdom building abilities with upgrades or new buildings for settlements and hamlets and other places you may capture as you mark your territory and try and find a home for your people. Once you're through the initial campaign story, that kind of tutorial, you're thrown into the deep end. And don't be fooled by what Songs of Silence may come across as kind of what I believe to be a fairly beautifully animated and nicely stylized world, because this darkness has teeth. The silence has teeth. Not just fighting these specific enemies, but more broadly. The campaign will be somewhat challenging, and you will have to potentially retry a few things, because some fights, like this one, are just not going to be manageable for you unless you're spending a bit more time and crafting a cohesive strategy rather than just blitzkrieging your way across. The introduction of different heroes, different combat styles, and again, the way that they interact with one another adds another great layer here to Songs of Silence as well. In this case, one of my absolute favorite functions plays out here too, the ambush system. Fairly straightforward, but the way that you move across the real map can have a direct impact on your fights, which are played out as an auto-battler fight. You'll notice I'm not actually directly controlling my units here, except for when I play my cards. One of them allows me to cast down that big asteroid, meteor, comet-looking thing down onto the enemy to stun them and damage them. This one lets me retreat from a fight that I might not otherwise win. But all of them will have different ways to impact the way that my units are auto-battling, as well as that broader system that I was talking about, where we are on the map. How much movement did we use last turn? These things will impact whether we're ambushed or not, And of course, having another hero and army nearby can be very useful if they want to talk to each other during your turn to regroup and trade units, or alternatively, come in and finish off an enemy that you've already weakened. Particularly important here because you can't reinforce during a fight, so my composition really matters. Here, using more magical forces, summoning in extra units with this ability, plopping them in behind the enemy, encircling them proper, and securing a victory. Victorious development, in terms of our heroes, can also take place, not just in the campaign, but across all of the game's different modes, of course. Interacting between heroes could let me change units, swap, buff up a particular army, but more importantly, they'll also bring those buildings that I was talking about earlier, improvements, and a unique deck of cards into play. This one, for example, here's the leveling up process, after getting enough experience in the fight, is making me choose between a new building, Fortify, upgrading an existing high house building for gold income, or a new combat card that will let me call a random unit from my reserves onto the battlefield, and that's the one I'll choose in this case. Alternatively, new cards and upgrades are available for all of your different heroes, so who you send in, who you fight with, who you choose to level up, can also have a drastic impact on the overall outcome of a game. Some cards aren't necessarily tied to specific heroes, or indeed heroes at all, instead potentially tied to raising the prosperity of a place, or indeed rebuilding it if it's been completely destroyed. Raised prosperity giving you more yield to spend on cards and upgrades and units as well. Here I'm recruiting some units for this army inside of one of my cities, maybe putting some into reserve, and carefully aligning where I want my units to be, because as we send them into battle here at the slightly broader view of the map, it's going to be important where they're placed, alongside of course those buildings that I was talking about earlier, here building up some extra fortifications for defense and supply as I launch another fight. Against what is, granted, in still quite an early state, right? Quite an early state game, a fairly impressive and wide variety of units too. Both the more humanoid to the magical, through to the completely mystical and mysterious, and machine-like units. I mean, there really is a wide variety that suits the game so well. The fights themselves, the atmosphere that they bring, also shouldn't be understated. It was, again, as I've mentioned earlier, one of the things that first drew me to Songs of Silence. Not just the variety of units, but the way that they look, the way they fight, the way this big thing lobs its giant, explosive ranged kind of artillery fire almost across the map. The way the cavalry units charge, and those beautiful comets that strike down and explode on the map. I am, quite honestly, in awe of the way that this game looks, particularly in those fights. Stepping aside from that campaign though, very story-driven narratives. Again, each mission fairly quick, right? You might do it in an hour, maybe an evening. You also have the option to play multiplayer, something I wasn't able to test myself in the production of this video, but the setup for it works very similarly to the skirmish mode, and the objectives are quite similar as well. Defend your capital and capture the enemy capitals, with a range of sort of neutral, somewhat hostile ones taking up most of the map early on. You will start with but one city, your capital city, and your opponents will as well. Again, defend yours, take theirs, and fight the many, many other territories in the region. Build them up, increase their prosperity, get some more units, bring them into a fight, maybe with an upgraded hero. That is the basics of how the game plays out. All of those things from the campaign stretch through into multiplayer and indeed the single player skirmish mode, where the setup is broadly similar, broadly the same as multiplayer there. Jumping into a single player skirmish world with the fog of war turned off handily at the start, you get a sense of the size and scale of what's going on. This larger world, of course, divided between the light and the deep darkness here. Look at this big dude. Terrifying, if not outnumbered by 50 tiny little men. Either way, putting that to one side, this, I think, is a fairly cohesive overview of what Songs of Silence offers. in this fairly early stage. And the fact that it is in the fairly early stages is acknowledged by the game itself. Once you reach the end of, I think, the second part of the campaign, you're greeted with this message that it is early. There's more to come, including the fact that there'll be more units, 120 plus, 15 plus hero classes, 3 playable factions, 150 different battle, strategic, and recruitment cards, and more. And so I think that's probably a fairly good place to wrap this video up. I hope to have given you a fairly good look at Songs of Silence, and of course there'll be a link below, again, if you'd like to check it out yourself. A Kickstarter through to a Steam launch, and of course, you can head to the Steam page now already, alongside wishlisting the game to check out the demo entirely for free too. So there's a lot of good stuff to enjoy in a beautiful, well-rounded, and uniquely stylized 4X strategy game in Songs of Silence, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it develops in future. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.